Prashant, Dr. Beeram.
It's done.
Thank you, Jahnavi. So we'll upload on the YouTube. Thank you.
As a student of music, it's provided me with the opportunity to reflect on the compositions that I know, as well as the rich history and tradition that we have in Carnatic music. Once again, I thank you all for having me a part of this assembly. And before I start, I would like to offer my salutations to all of my gurus. Any and all success that I achieve is attributed to them. Thank you. Over the course of the last 3 presentations, we've taken a look at the trinity of Carnatic music composers. We've taken a look at Tyagaraja, Dikshidhar, and Shyama Sastry, the famous trinity of composers. Based off of a suggestion from last time, today we'll take a look at Purandarasa, known as the Sangeeta Pitamaha, or father or grandfather of Carnatic music. I would like to begin by actually presenting one of his very famous compositions, Jaya Jaya Janaki Kanta, in the ragam Natte, set to Kanda Chapu. Jaya 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 Janaki Kanta Jaya Sadhu Jana Vinuta Jaya Tumayi Vananda Jaya Bhagyavanta Jaya 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 Janaki Kanta Jaya Sadhu Jana Vinuta Jaya Tumayi Vananda Jaya Bhagyavanta Jaya 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 Janaki Kanta Jaya Sadhu Jana Vinuta Jaya Tumayi Vananda Jaya Bhagyavanta Jaya 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 Janaki Kanta Jaya Sadhu Jana Vinuta Jaya Tumayi Vananda Jaya Bhagyavanta Jaya Jaya Dasharatana Magavira Dasharatana Magavira Dashakanta Samhara Pashupatishvara Mitra Pashupatishvara Mitra Pavana Charitra Kusuma Bana Swarupa Kujala Kirtikala Asamasasa Siksham Bujatala Jaya 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 Janaki Kanta Jaya Sadhu Jana Vinuta Jaya Tumayi Vananda Jaya Bhagyavanta Jaya Jaya Samagana Vilola Sadhu Jana Paripalaka Mitata Pradata Kirti Samjata Samagana Vilola Sadhu Jana Paripalaka Mitata Pradata Kirti Samjata Soma Surya Prakasha Sakala Lokadish Shri Maharagubira Sindhu Gambira Jaya Jaya Soma Surya Prakasha Sakala Lokadish Shri Maharagubira Sindhu Gambira Jaya 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 Janaki Kanta Jaya Sadhu Jana Vinuta Jaya Tumayi Vananda Jaya Bhagyavanta Jaya Jaya Sakala Shastra Vichara Sharanu Jana Mandara Vikasita Bhujavadana Vishwamaya Sadana Sakala Shastra Vichara Sharanu Jana Mandara Vikasita Bhujavadana Vishwamaya Sadana Sukrita Mokshadisha Saketa Puravas Bhakta Vatsala Rama Purandara Vithala Jaya Jaya Sakala Shastra Vichara Sharanu Jana Mandara Vikasita Bhujavadana Vishwamaya Sadana Sukrita Mokshadisha Saketa Puravas Bhakta Vatsala Rama Purandara Vithala Jaya 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 Janaki Kanta Jaya Sadhu Jana Vinuta Jaya Tumayi Vananda Jaya Bhagyavanta Jaya Jaya We will start by taking a look at Purandaradasa's life. So who was Purandaradasa? He was a saint, a musician, a singer, a composer, a proponent of social reform, a poet, a great devotee, and much more. Written historical sources suggest that Purandaradasa was born somewhere around 1484 CE to a diamond merchant in a Kannada family in Shemapura near Tirthahalli in the present-day state of Karnataka. Some say his native town was actually Purandaragatta in Karnataka, or Purandaragat near Pune. This is considered to actually be a historical mistake, since people connected his mudra or his signature in his compositions, Purandara Vithala, to actually be a town. And yet this town actually served mainly as a military encampment in the 15th, 16th century. So most historical sources say that that was not where he was born. His father was the wealthy merchant Varadappa Nayaka, and his mother was Leelavati. The boy originally was actually named Srinivasa Nayaka after the patron idol of the Tirumala Venkateshwara temple. His education was very thorough, covering Kannada, Sanskrit, sacred music, and very many other pursuits. By the age of 16, Srinivasa Nayaka had finished most of his studies and was then married off to Saraswati Bai. Saraswati Bai was described as a very devoted, pious young girl who had a lot of devotion and spirituality in her practice. We'll see how this is important a little bit later. When the young Srinivasa Nayaka was 20 years old, his parents unfortunately died, and he then inherited his father's business. His father's business dealt in diamonds, gemstones, and actually a pawn shop or pawning. He then built this business, took it over, built this business, and it actually flourished very much so. It earned him the name Navakoti Narayana, translated as a very, very rich man worth 90 million. Being a diamond merchant, at this point, the young Srinivasa Nayaka, even at the age of 20, was said to be very greedy, miserly, very attached to worldly possessions, and focused on making money and making profit and paying attention to every single penny that came in and out of his pawn shop. So how did this diamond merchant, who was said to be greedy and jealous and envious of wealth and really hoarding his wealth, translate into the embodiment of the Bhakti movement, or the Sangeeta Pitamaha, the father of Carnatic music? Well, there's a very beautiful story. Popular legend actually narrates a miraculous incident that occurred in Srinivasa Nayaka's life, which made him completely change his ways, renouncing his former attachments, his former self, in favor of service through bhakti to the Lord, to Purandara Vittala, as they say. The story goes that Lord Krishna, the Lord, wanted to reform Srinivasa Nayaka, wanted to change his ways. So he approached him disguised as a very poor man. He was looking for money. This poor man was looking for money to perform his son's Upanayanam, or sacred thread ceremony. And so he came to Srinivasa Nayaka and said, "Can I please have some money? I am very poor. I don't have any money for this ceremony." And he begged Srinivasa Nayaka for this money. Srinivasa Nayaka did not treat him very well, rejected his plea, mocked him for coming and asking the great Srinivasa Nayaka, the one who supposedly has 9 million in terms of wealth, and said, "I'm not going to give you anything," and actually turned him out of his house. Well, the poor man then very quietly, very secretively, repeated his plea to Srinivasa's wife, Saraswati Bai. Saraswati Bai, again, as we said earlier, was described as being very spiritual, very generous in nature. She felt extremely bad and felt a lot of pity for this poor man upon seeing his condition, and said, "Okay, I will give you something." And instead of giving him money, she actually gave him one of her precious mukuti, or diamond nose rings, without telling her husband, very secretively. She chose not to tell her husband and handed it off to the poor man. Obviously, the poor man, who is tutored to be Lord Vishnu in disguise, then came back to Srinivasa Nayaka to sell the nose ring and to get money for his son's Upanayanam. Srinivasa Nayaka at first did not recognize the nose ring, berated the old man, but then when he did recognize the nose ring, being the clever person that he was, he said, "Oh my goodness, this is my wife's. How did she do this without telling me?" Bought the nose ring from the old man and immediately hurried home to confront his wife. He went straight home and he demanded to Saraswati Bai, "Produce that nose ring that you had. I want to see it right now." Immediate inspection. Saraswati Bai, realizing that her husband had now recognized her subterfuge, felt extremely bad. and decided to actually end her life through poison. Being a very devout woman, she decided to sit down and pray to the Lord one last time before she took the poison and chose to end her life. And yet, when she looked at the cup of poison after praying, sorry? When she actually looked at the poison cup, she noticed something very interesting. Within the poison cup, there was a nose ring, identical to the one that she had just given away. She could not believe her eyes, and amazed at the miracle, she then went immediately to her husband and recounted the entire incident to him, explaining how she had given the old man this nose ring, and this nose ring had now appeared in her cup when she had decided to take poison and die. Srinivasa Nayaka was completely confused. He did not know what had happened. He was totally lost. He could not believe that somehow, by some miracle, the same nose ring that he had in his hand had somehow materialized in this cup. He did not know how. He couldn't understand. And he was taken aback. And this was the moment where he experienced a realization. He recognized the unfailing grace, the grace of the Lord that saved his wife in that moment. He recognized the power that could produce a gold or a diamond ornament out of nothing, theoretically. He recognized that power and he was shocked. And this brought about an immediate change in his complete personality. I said earlier, we noted that he was very greedy and he focused on money, he focused on profit. And now at the age of 30, he said, I don't need any of this. He donated all of his wealth to charity. And actually, along with his family, he abandoned his house, he abandoned his profession, and decided to lead the life of a mendicant. He began to live on the alms or bhiksha that he would get from other people. And all he did was sing the glory of Lord Krishna, of Lord Narayana. Actually, it's very interesting. His very first composition, Analekara and Shuddha Savari, now sung very popularly as a Geetam, taught to little children, laments his previous life of indulgence. It laments the fact that he wasn't doing what he should have been doing. Instead of chanting the name of the Lord, he was actually focused on riches. As a mendicant, over the course of his wanderings, this Srinivasa Nayaka, again, around a little over 30 years of age now, then met Vyasatirtha. And Vyasatirtha was a chief exponent of the Madhva philosophy and Vaishnavism. Vyasatirtha was also the Rajaguru of Krishnadevaraya, emperor at the time of the Vijayanagara kingdom. So Vyasatirtha came to Srinivasa Nayaka and gave him his formal initiation, or his formal training, in 1525. At this point, Srinivasa Nayaka was 40 years old. Something to note here that I think is interesting as we make continuous comparisons between Vagyakaras. If you look at Tyagaraja, Dikshtar, and Shama Sastri, a lot of them had their initiation, so to speak, by a guru at a much younger age, say between the age of 15 to 25, 27. Purandaradasa did not have that until he was 40 years old. And yet his contributions are no less great, are no less prolific to the field of Carnatic music. Just goes to show that one can learn and one can change even at a much older age. I think that's a very interesting parallel to think about here. It was actually during this formal initiation with Vyasatirtha that Srinivasa Nayaka was bestowed with the name Purandaradasa, or servant of the Lord, servant of Purandara itself, of Purandara Vitthala. After he was bestowed with this name, he traveled throughout the Vijayanagara Empire, visiting many places all over, composing many different songs with soul-stirring lyrics in praise of Krishna. In his last few years, he actually stayed in Hampi, and he sang in Krishnadevaraya's Darbar, the king's Darbar itself. The mandapam that he actually stayed in is still named after him. On January 2nd, 1565, Purandaradasa died at the age of 80, and a little after his death, the entire Vijayanagara Empire collapsed. So if you look at his composing days, for the most part, really between the age of 35 all the way up to 80 are really the time in which he composed. That was his composing period, because prior to that, as we know, he was the complete opposite, the diamond merchant, the greedy diamond merchant, as we say. So now that we have talked about Purandarasa's life, let's take a little bit of a closer look at his actual compositions. Legend has it that Purandarasa actually composed 475,000 kirtanes, or songs. 475,000. According to the story, he actually wanted to compose 500,000 over the course of his life, but he was not able to complete this. There was this last 25,000, which seems to him apparently a small number, but now when we think about it, it seems like a very large number. But there was this last 25,000 left. Unable to complete this, he actually asked his younger son, Madhapati, to complete this for him. His son told his father he would accomplish this in his next janma, or his next rebirth. Many people believe that Purandaradasa was then reborn as Vijayadasa, who was born in the Raichur district of Karnataka much later. And Vijayadasa actually completed the remaining 25,000 kirtanes as promised. So this is where that kind of connection comes through. We only have about 700 of his compositions available today. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of them available. Since most of Purandarasa's songs are in praise of Lord Narayana, he is also believed to be an avatar of Narada himself. In his Geya Natakam opera, Prahada Bhakti Vijayam, Saint Tyagaraja has actually paid tribute to Purandaradasa and his compositions, his contributions to actually Carnatic music itself, the form and the function that we'll see a little bit later. Purandarasa's compositions contain sahityam, full of devotion. Most of his compositions are actually in Kannada, with some being in Sanskrit. His compositions depict simple messages, very in line with the bhakti movement that was happening around India at that time. And they're meant to uplift the masses. He praises the devotees of Krishna who have earned his good fortune. He praises Lakshmi for being so close to Krishna. He praises Yashoda for being able to be the mother of Krishna. He praises Vidura for being Krishna's friend. Throughout his sahityam, he also introduced a lot of colloquial words in Kannada, inwoven societal topics as well, really meant to be the songs of the common man that anybody could sing, whether they were learned, not learned, it did not matter. Purandarasa wanted his music to be sung and enjoyed by everyone. An example of some very simple sahityam, where he's actually entreating the Lord to come quickly, is the beautiful composition Odi Bareya in the Ragam Bhairavi in Aditalam. The Anupallavi actually describes how Purandarasa wants to talk to Krishna, wants to play with him, wants to give him hugs and actually be there and enjoy and have so much happiness with him. In very simple Kannada, something that can be understood and actually appreciated by almost anyone. So I will sing that song now. Odi Bareya Vaikuntapati Ninna Noduve Manadaniye. 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 Odi Mutadi Madani, Odi Mutadi Madadi Santosha Kudi, 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 Padi Pugaruenu Parama Purusha Hariye, Padi Pugaruenu Parama Purusha Hariye, Padi Pugaruenu Parama Purusha Hariye, Padi Pugaruenu Parama Hariye Odi Pariya Vaikundavadina Moduve Mananiye Odi Pariya Vaikundavadina Moduve Mananiye Mangala Mohana Kaya Ranga Mangalatmaka Mohana Kaya Ranga Sangeeta Rola Sadgunashila Mangalatmaka Mohana Kaya Ranga Sangeeta Rola Saguna Shila Anganeyarigala Ati Priyanada Anganeyarigala Ati Priyanada Anganeyarigala Ati Priyanada Anganeyarigala Ati Priyanada Shubhanga Shri Purandara Vithalaraya Shubhanga Shri Purandara Vithalaraya Shubhanga Shri Purandara Vithalaraya Odi Pariya Vaikundavadina Noduve Mananiye Odi Pariya Vaikundavadina Noduve Mananiye You can see here in this Sahityam that it's very understandable. He's not talking about major philosophies. He's describing simple actions that he wants to do with Lord Krishna, and the simple act of pleading with the Lord to come here, come be with me, come fast, come very quickly. And it's that simple language that I think endeared him to the masses and his compositions for generations after. Apart from creating compositions, Purandarasa also had a few major contributions to Carnatic music that we can see his influence in even today. One of the first is that the basic musical instruction that we have today. Purandarasa is actually the one who introduced Maya Malagole as the basic scale. Prior to then, music teaching was done in various different formats. He was the one who introduced Maya Malagole and said, we should start with this kind of scale. He then also created a systematic format of teaching. He created this format that included Swaravalis, or sadly Varses as we know them today, Janta Varses, Alankarams, Aparsai, Geetams, and so on. This system of instruction is actually followed today completely, with students of Carnatic music beginning their lessons in Maya Malagole with the Sarli Varses originally. He composed many Lakshana Geetams, he composed Swarajatis, all of these beginning instruction songs, even small kirtanes that we learn, all of them are really standardized and put together by Purandaradasa. Prior to him, there was no sort of set mode of teaching Carnatic music. And his work and a lot of his compositions form the basis and are still followed even today, so many years later. He also introduced folk ragas, having grown up listening to a lot of different devotional music. He set many of his songs to folk ragas so that the common man could learn and sing them, rather than setting them to more complicated ragas. Instead, he set them to ragas that people already knew and people already sang. He also composed many suladis that have become the standard for when we think of raga lakshanas, or the shape and the beauty of a ragam itself. If you look at his successors in the Haridasa tradition or the Haridasa Bhajana tradition, they are actually said to have followed the system he devised, and they passed down all of his compositions through the oral tradition. Purandarasa is also credited with having composed the first lullabies, which inspired many other composers to create the same kind of format of a lullaby, truly lulling Lord Vishnu to sleep. We can also see there's a very interesting connection between Purandarasa and Hindustani music. He also influenced Hindustani music in many different ways, not just through his compositions, but also one of his disciples. One of his disciples was Swami Haridas, and we know that Swami Haridas in turn tutored the Hindustani maestro Tansen. So we can see that connection between the two as well. So when we talk about him as the Sangeeta Pitamaha of Carnatic music, he's also given so much to Hindustani music, and that connection is a very beautiful connection. The next thing I want to talk about is actually social reform. I mentioned that Purandaradasa was not just a poet, not just a musician, but truly somebody who actually focused on social activism and social reform through his kirtanes, which is a very interesting thing to think about. The Sahityam of his kirtanes actually talk a lot about the defects that exist in society. I mentioned before that his guru Vyasatirtha was a great exponent of the Madhva tradition. His philosophy is based on bhakti, the idea of devotion based on the Narada Bhakti Sutras. It's focused on complete self-surrender and unadulterated love for this Lord. So much love, pure, brimming with love, truly, that has no bounds, is limitless, and is truly the source of all devotion. This philosophy comes from the Madhva philosophy as Vaishnavism, the idea that the individual soul or the jiva is a pratibhimbam or reflection of Ishvara, who is the bimba or source. And he beautifully describes this and really emulates this throughout his compositions. As he talks about this philosophy, Purandarasa also questions many practices. As I was going through the lyrics, I was finding all of these very specific instances, which I thought were very interesting. One of the first is actually the caste system and casteism. He describes how one's birth cannot determine the status of any individual. He asks questions very simply. Just because the sugar cane is crooked, does that mean the sweetness will also be crooked? Just because the milk comes from cows of different color, does that mean the milk will also be a different color? Does that mean the milk will also taste bad? He asked these very simple questions, and we see those as metaphors for the caste system itself. He believed that instead of being judged by the basis of their birth, people should do their best, should give up attachments and focus on helping others through charity. And that's truly how they redeem themselves, and that's what determines their character, not where they were born, what family they were born into, and what sort of profession. Purandarasa also discusses gender equality, and he proclaims that both men and women should have the same rights and the same obligations in everyday life. Something that I thought was very interesting was in one of his Sahityams, he states that the necklaces, the earrings, the bangles, the rings, the nose rings, the toe rings, the ornaments of a woman are not important. The ornaments that she wears don't mean anything. The true embellishment of a woman is actually the beauty of her intellect and her noble conduct, which I thought was a very beautiful sentiment, again, illustrating sort of his idea of equality, right? The outward appearance is not necessarily the most important, but truly what's inward is what matters so much more. He also very strongly proclaimed forcefully that people should not be branded as untouchable on the basis of birth, similar to the idea of casteism. Instead, he proclaims that the character of the individual is what determines whether somebody should be deemed as untouchable or not. In this matter, which I thought was very interesting, Purandarasa was actually supported by his guru Vyasatirtha, and he was also supported by the very great Krishnadevaraya, the king of Vijayanagara himself. He had a lot of backing in this idea that untouchables is not something that is okay. The composer actually takes it upon himself to describe the qualities of one who is untouchable. He describes the person who lacks self-discipline should be called an untouchable. The person who plots against his own government should be called untouchable. The person who has a lot of money, is very rich and prosperous, and yet refuses to give anything to charity should be called untouchable. The person who poisons his opponents to eliminate them should be called untouchable. And finally, the person who prides himself over his purity of caste, his own caste, should be deemed as untouchable. These people are all the true untouchables, is what Purandaradasa says. And when he refers to Purandara Vitthala, he refers to almost any god. He's not necessarily talking about only Krishna, he's talking about any god and any and all gods. As we have seen in the two compositions that I presented, one is on Rama, one is on Krishna. He's composed on very many different deities. And he blatantly rejects the idea of untouchability itself in our society, along with the caste system, which as a poet, as somebody who is providing and sharing that message to the masses, he's able to institute social reform through that way, being one of the early social activists, as we like to call it, but through music, which is such a beautiful thing. In terms of legacy, the compositions of Purandaradasa were popularized by a few different people. Bidaram Krishnappa and Madras Lalitangi actually both popularized his compositions. Lalitangi's daughter, the illustrious Padma Vibhushan Sangeeta Kalanidhi Srimati M.L. Vasantakumari, propagated his compositions to a great extent. She was actually awarded an honorary doctorate for her contributions to his music and spreading his music. As I mentioned earlier, with Purandarasa's compositions also being popular in Hindustani music, they have been adapted by many different musicians. Bhimsen Joshi, Madhav Guri, Baswaraj Rajguru are all examples of people who have made his compositions much more popular in recent years. Currently, vocalists such as the Bombay Sisters, Upendra Bhatt, Praveen Godkhindi, etc., they all continue the tradition of performing his compositions. A very interesting project by Tirumala Tirupati Devasthanam, is actually conducting the Dasa Sahitya project to propagate his kritis, to go through his Sahityam, to continue spreading them to the masses and making sure that they reach a lot of different people. So as we come to the conclusion of understanding Purandaradasa's life, his compositions, I would like to take a minute and not necessarily compare, but relate Purandaradasa to the context of Tyagaraja Dikshidhar and Shyama Sastri, or the Mummurtigal, the trinity of Carnatic music. What I think is very interesting is that when we talk about Tyagaraja, Shyama Sastri, and Muthuswami Dikshidhar, obviously at a much later period in the 1600s, early 1700s, and their compositions, we see the great philosophy, we see the great knowledge, and we see the level of detail in terms of shastras that they go into. Purandaradasa's compositions are truly based on bhakti all around. Simple bhakti, understanding and communicating with the Lord, asking the Lord to come and be with him, but also describing all of these different incidents. Purandaradasa's goal with his compositions was truly to proclaim the path of bhakti itself, demonstrate how the path of bhakti can lead to moksha, and all while bringing that to the masses as he went door to door asking for bhiksha. But when he did ask for bhiksha, he went door to door singing these songs, singing these kirtanes, all in the praise of the Lord. This doesn't mean to say that Purandarasa's kritis are any less prolific or his sahityam is any less mysterious and beautiful and multi-layered, as we say Dikshidhar or Shyama Sastri's is. But Purandarasa's at the core is truly about understanding the message that wealth, material sources, all of that is immaterial. It does not matter. What truly matters is bhakti and devotion and unadulterated love for the Lord. And that is the message that he's trying to send. It's such a beautiful message. I would like to conclude actually by singing a beautiful composition, a kriti, that I think really encapsulates a lot of these different things and praise of Lord Krishna. The Pallavi asks, how am I poor? How am I a stranger in a strange land? As long as you're there, oh Hari, I'm fine. I can't be a stranger as long as you're there. There's no way. It describes the Lord as the one who teaches, who imparts wisdom, and seeks total surrender and says, as long as you're there, I'm not stranger. I have no need for material wealth. I'm not poor. I'm rich as beyond means. Rich in so many different ways as long as you're there. These questions are all rhetorical that Purandaradasa asks, and again, implying that there's no poverty, there's no misery in a strange land, no fear for the one who is surrendered to the Lord. Nane ke Badavanu in Behag, set to Kandachapu, popularized by Bharat Ratna Sangeeta Kalanidhi, Srimati M.S. Subbulakshmi. ನಾನೇಕೆ ಬಡವನು, ನಾನೇಕೆ ಪರದೇಶಿ, 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 ನಾನೇಕೆ ಬಡವನು. ಶ್ರೀನಿಧೆ ಹರಿಯನಗೆ ನೀನಿರುವ ತನಗ, ಶ್ರೀನಿಧೆ ಹರಿಯನಗೆ ನೀನಿರುವ ತನಗ, ಶ್ರೀನಿಧೆ ಹರಿಯನಗೆ ನೀನಿರುವ ತನಗ, ಶ್ರೀನಿಧೆ ಹರಿಯನಗೆ ನೀನಿರುವ ತನಗ, ನಾನೇಕೆ ಬಡವನು, ನಾನೇಕೆ ಪರದೇಶಿ, ನಾನೇಕೆ ಬಡವನು. ವಿದ್ಯೆ ಹೇಳುವ ನೀನೆ, ಬುದ್ಧಿ ಕಲಿಸುವ ನೀನೆ, ವಿದ್ಯೆ ಹೇಳುವ ನೀನೆ, ಬುದ್ಧಿ ಕಲಿಸುವ ನೀನೆ, ವಿದ್ಯೆ ಹೇಳುವ ನೀನೆ, ಬುದ್ಧಿ ಕಲಿಸುವ ನೀನೆ, ಉದ್ಧಾರಕರ್ತ ಮಾಮ ಸ್ವಾಮಿ ನೀನೆ, ಉದ್ಧಾರಕರ್ತ ಮಾಮ ಸ್ವಾಮಿ ನೀನೆ, ಮುದ್ದು ಸಿರಿ ಪುರಂದರ ವಿಠಲ ನಿನ್ನಡಿ ಮೇಲೆ, ಮುದ್ದು ಸಿರಿ ಪುರಂದರ ವಿಠಲ ನಿನ್ನಡಿ ಮೇಲೆ, ಮುದ್ದು ಸಿರಿ ಪುರಂದರ ವಿಠಲ ನಿನ್ನಡಿ ಮೇಲೆ, ಬಿಟ್ಟುಕೊಂಡಿರುವ ನನಗೆ ತರ ಭಯವೋ, ಬಿಟ್ಟುಕೊಂಡಿರುವ ನನಗೆ ತರ ಭಯವೋ, ನಾನೇಕೆ ಬಡವನು, ನಾನೇಕೆ ಪರದೇಶಿ, ನಾನೇಕೆ ಬಡವನು. With that, I would like to thank everybody once again for giving me this wonderful opportunity. Thank you, Raju uncle, for conceiving this series of Vagyakaras. And I hope this series has connected between the two. I have really tried to connect each one to the next. So thank you once again. I'm very happy to be a part of this assembly.
Dr. Biram. And Jahnavi, do you want to do Hanuman Chalisa? Okay.
Yes,
Dr. Biram.
श्री गुरु चरण सरोज रज निज मन मुकुर सुधारि वरणो रघुबर विमल यस जोदायक फलचार बुद्धिहीन तनु जानिके सुमिरो पवन कुमार बल बुद्धि विद्या देहु मुहि हरहु कलेश विकार जय हनुमान ज्ञान गुण सागर जय कपीस तिहु लोक उजागर राम दूत तुलित बलधामा अंजनी पुत्र पवन सुत नामा महावीर विक्रम बजरंगी कुमति निवार सुमति के संगी कंचन वरण विराज सुबेशा कानन कुंडल कुंचित केशा हाथ वज्र ध्वजा विराजे कांधे मूंज जनेऊ साजे शंकर सुवन केसरी नंदन तेज प्रताप महाजगवंदन विद्यावान गुणी अति चातुर राम काज करिबे को आतुर प्रभु चरित्र सुनिबे को रसिया राम लखन सीता मन बसिया सूक्ष्म रूप धरि सिंह दिखावा विकट रूप धरि लंक जरावा भीम रूप धरि असुर संहारे रामचंद्र के काज सवारे लाए सजीवन लखन जियाए श्री रघुवीर हरषि उर लाए रघुपति कीन्ही बहुत बड़ाई तुम मम प्रिय भरत सम भाई सहस बदन तुम रोजस गावे अस कई श्रीपति कंठ लगावे सनकादिक ब्रह्मादि मुनीषा नारद शारद सहित अहीशा कुबेर दिगपाल जहाते कवि कोविद कहि सके कहाते तुम उपकार सुग्रीव ही कीना राम मिलाय राजपद दीना तुमरो मंत्र विभीषण माना लंकेश्वर भय सब जग जाना जुग सहस्त्र जो जन पर भानु लील्यो ताहि मधुर फल जानु प्रभु मुद्रिका मिली मुख माही जल दिलांगी गए अचरज नाही दुर्गम काज जगत के जेते सुगम अनुग्रह तुमरे तेते राम दुआरे तुम रखवारे होते न आज्ञा बिनु पैसारे सब सुख लहे तुम्हारी शरणा तुम रक्षक काहू को डरना आपन तेज समारो आपे तीनों लोक हांकते कापे भूत पिशाच निकट नहीं आवे महावीर जब नाम सुनावे नासे रोग हरे सब बीरा जपत निरंतर हनुमत बीरा संकट से हनुमान छुड़ावे मन क्रम वचन ध्यान जो लावे पर राम तपस्वी राजा तिनके काज सकल तुम साजा और मनोरथ जो कोई लावे सोई अमित जीवन पल पावे चारों जुग प्रताप तुम्हारा है प्रसिद्ध जगत उजियारा साधु संत के तुम रखवारे असुर निकंदन राम दुलारे अष्ट सिद्धि नवनिधि के दाता अस पर दीन जानकी माता राम रसायन तुम्हारे पासा सदा रहो रघुपति के दासा तुम्हारे भजन राम को पावे जन्म जन्म के दुख बिसरावे अंत काल रघुवर पुर जाई जहाँ जन्म हरि भक्त कहाई और देवता चेतन धरई हनुमत से सर्व सुख करई संकट कटे मिटई सब बीरा जो सुमिरै हनुमत बलवीरा जय 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 हनुमान गोसाई कृपा करो गुरुदेव की नाई जो सत बार पाठ कर कोई छूट ही बंदी महासुख होई जो यह पढ़े हनुमान चालीसा होय सिद्धि साखी गौरीशा तुलसीदास सदा हरि चेरा की जयनाथ हृदय महादेरा पवन तनय संकट हरण मंगल मूर्ति रूप राम लखन सीता सहित हृदय बसउ सुरभूप सियावर रामचंद्र की जय बोलो रे भाई सब संतन की जय उमापति महादेव की जय राधावर कृष्ण चंद्र की जय बोलो रे भाई सब संतन की जय कि अपने गुरुदेव की जय कि अपने मात पिता की जय.
Jahnavi, can you close up with Mangala Sloka?
Yes, absolutely. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om.
Thank you, Jahnavi. That is so beautiful and heart-filling. And your presentation was so detailed with every single action during his lifetime, with all the specifics, and followed by your wonderful, highly talented musical aspect of it. I have one small question. I also want to thank you on behalf of Temple. Thank you. And this is, we all really thoroughly enjoyed your sessions, and
Thank you.
we are ever so grateful. And you're always welcome, either in person or online, to perform for the temple and for the people here.
Thank you
I
so
have a
much.
small question though. Uh, from 15th century, 16th century, that far back, I know the scripts and lyrics were kept either written on copper shields or palm leaves or things like those. And there was no clear way of uh, passing on the tunes. Do you think these tunes have changed over time, more so when they wrote so many and sang so many? Um, do we think these are originals? Probably not, right?
So that's a very good question, actually. There's a lot of debate about this, especially musicians. If you talk to many musicologists, we discuss how what we sing today is very, very different than what Tyagaraja envisioned. You know, what's written in the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini, arguably the most famous text of Subbarama Dikshitar's son. Actually, what's written in that is very, very different from what we understand as what we understand as Bhairavi or a composition today. So we know that as these songs evolved, things changed. People chose to change them. People chose to add on to them and change Sangadis. Whether what we sing now is exactly what was imagined then, I highly doubt that it's exactly the same. But we can trace back a lot of times the lineage of a certain song, and we can say that this song is probably much older and this song has stayed within the Padantaram. And the way we do that is really through the oral tradition. So I mentioned that Purandarasa himself, as he standardized this curriculum, so to speak, he also standardized this method of transferring the knowledge, this oral tradition of handing it down to all of the Haridasa singers who did. And when you hand down the oral tradition, you're not only handing down the Sangeetam and the Sahityam, you're also handing down the tune itself. And little changes here and there are obviously very normal as they go down. But over time, we hope that at least some of those sangadis, or what we call variations, have been preserved. There, again, like I said, there's a lot of debate. I highly doubt that they're exactly as the original or exactly how Purandaradasa himself sang them. Um, but we do try to keep the same aesthetic and the same essence of what the song means. A lot of times you'll have musicians who take it upon themselves to add sangadis, change ragams even, because they feel like it matches a song better. And so that's something where I think is both a beautiful thing and maybe also a sad thing, since we don't know how it's sung originally. But it's also a beautiful thing because music is very much a living, breathing art form. that's influenced by the musicians who sing, the composers who compose, and the rasikas themselves who actually listen and pass that down. So
thank you. Thank you.
absolutely.
Other comments?
Yes, this is Shamla. I agree with Madhav that Janavi presented a detailed and complete description of the life and the musical life of Purandaradas. It was very nice, Janavi. And also you pointed out about the MLV. You know, she's the one, MLV is... say that, what is her full name? MLV?
M.L. Vasanta Kumari.
ML Vasanta Kumari. She is one of the trinities in the musical world that the others include M.S. Subalakshmi, D.K. Patamal, and ML Vasanta Kumari. So the Purandaradas Kritis I have heard most is through her tapes only. And I am not about her. You mentioned Latangi. Her teacher, is it her guru?
It's actually her mother. Actually,
Oh,
her
mother.
was,
Oh, I didn't
yes,
know that. So
yes, her own mother, Madras Lalitangi, actually.
Madras Lalitangi. So the most of the Purandaradas Kritis and the rare ones I have heard is from MLV's tapes. In fact, she was in Pittsburgh in 1980s, and she gave just a Purandaradas Kriti concert. So that is how I got. Now, I want to congratulate you, and I want to tell you how much I admire the easiness with which you render music. Okay, it is heartful and it is heartfelt. I wish God will continue His blessings on you for the longest time to do the same. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Any other comments?
Janavi, you do it with so much of ease and fluency, and of course, the swara and swara jnana. My goodness. So I was told, or I read somewhere, Annamacharya and Purandara are of same time period.
Similar time period, yes, and very much related. Both very much related to the Bhakti movement as well.
Yes, and then I think there is a song Kirtana Narayanate Namo Namo. I think one influenced the other. I think in that, so it is in both languages, Telugu and Kannada.
Yes, very true. They influence each other, and it's very interesting. And once again, to see parallels. If you look at composers all across the board, or Vagyakaras as we're calling them, it's very interesting to see the same parallels, the same ideals. The cliche that music has no language. Truly, it doesn't. The same ideas, the same emotions of bhakti and devotion are expressed all across different languages and different compositions, and that's such a beautiful thing. Yeah, and then tomorrow is Akshaya Tritiya, and it's already there in India. So I think Bhagyada Lakshmi Varama was written by him. Purandaradasa, is that right? Yes. Bhagyada Lakshmi. Okay, maybe if you could sing just a couple of lines, and then thank you. That was my request. Yeah, thanks. Yes, I can sing the Pallavi. Absolutely. Are there any other questions before I sing that though? I just wanted to make sure. Okay. Lata Garu is there, and many others who know the music are there. Anup might have enjoyed the most because he could understand the lyrics in Kannada also, I think. Very true.
Thank you.
Bhagyada Lakshmi Baramma, Bhagyada Lakshmi Baramma, Nammani Saubhagyada Lakshmi Baramma, Nammani Saubhagyada Lakshmi Baramma. You know, we're at the end of time, so I didn't want to take
Yeah,
up too much.
thank you. You know, we started with Tulsi Dasa, and then now we're concluding with Purandara Dasa, and in between the Great Trinity, and then others have pitched in for Swati Tirunal and Bhakta Ramadas, and then Annamacharya, I think, in next couple of sessions. So thank you so much, and I'll be in touch with you for future sessions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Raju uncle.
Very nice, Jahnavi. In one of those upcoming sessions, you promised us to give a concert on this Vagekaras.
Yes, I have already been thinking about that. I know Raju uncle mentioned, so I hope to put together a concert that kind of highlights a lot of the same topics that we talked about and pulls compositions from the three Vagyakaras, obviously the three of the Trinity, as well as Purandara Rasa. So hopefully bringing it all together.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Jahnavi, thank you again. And very few people have ability of oratory of your level and singing talents of your level. And that combo is very powerful.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And everyone have Shubhratri.
Shubhratri.
Thanks, Jahnavi.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed
Thank
it.
you and Shubhratri.
Thank you.